An area of the lore that too often goes unnoticed is the Cold War fought between Darth Vader and the Emperor. On the surface, Vader was undyingly loyal to his master, but the reality told a different story. He has resented Sidious for all the lies and manipulations that has changed his life for the worse. Sidious is of course aware of this, which is why the two Sith find themselves locked in a silent but an ever-raging battle. It's not a battle of lightsabers or force abilities, because Vader knows his master would crush him. But Palpatine had layers upon layers of contingency plans in place should his apprentice ever rise against him. But while we often examine the machinations of Sidious, Vader was a schemer in his own right, and he was not above developing his own contingencies for Palpatine. Some of them were a break glass in case of emergency, while others were strokes of genius that Vader used to chip away at his master's control. Welcome back to the Archives, lore junkies. In today's holocron, we are going to attempt to uncover Vader's secret anti-Palpatine contingency plans, so let us begin. Admittedly, it was difficult to find places where the Dark Lord was willing to go against his master. There was a certain measure of acceptance that Vader had in his life as the Emperor's enforcer. Although everything that he had was taken from him, he did at least get a few things that he had wanted. He was one of the most powerful and most feared beings in the galaxy. He could make things the way that he wanted them to be. People stayed in line when he was around, and anything he could ever want was at his beck and call. No longer did he have to strive and grovel for accolades. People respected, and better, they feared him. Not to mention in the absence of Padme, his family, and the Jedi Order, it was his service to the Empire that gave him purpose. To lose his master in the Empire would mean reducing his life to nothing. This was the biggest reason that he never seemed to make too many moves against his master. Not only that, but his master was just too powerful, and at times, felt almost omniscient. Trying to pull one over him was nearly impossible because the Emperor was always 2 steps ahead. His powers and foresight kept him well informed on the future, and if he couldn't see something, then his private cult of dark-side prophets could. Palpatine was an all-seeing eye, and it felt like a death sentence to even consider making plans against him. Having said that, it was still worth it to Vader to at least cover his own back. Even if he may not be able to overthrow Sidious by himself, he could definitely make sure that his own position was secure. He was constantly having to look over his shoulder anyways, because Palpatine was prone to betraying him as a test, punishment, or sometimes just for his own amusement. Vader may be under Sidious's thumb, but he refused to be puppeteered like a marionette, so his contingency plans largely involved keeping those strings cut. And so the first anti-Palpatine plan was to neutralize one of his master's own contingencies. When Sidious first constructed Vader's suit, he created it out of a material that was superconductive to electricity. Durasteel and armor plates tend to carry a current. This made Vader incredibly vulnerable to Force lightning, which was Sidious's finest weapon. Palpatine knew that, in an event of a betrayal, his instinctual reaction would be to use the power that he was most adept with. In fact, it was said that Palpatine was so good at the ability that he used it more than telekinesis because it was faster to deploy. Sidious also knew that if his apprentice ever tried to fight him, it would be wise to put him down as quickly as possible. He may have been stronger, but he did not want a prolonged battle against Lord Vader, and so for many years, Vader's suit carried this deep weakness. But at some point during what we call the Dark Ages, Vader discovered this weakness in his armor and modified it to add protection. Adding insulation to the suit kept normal electric currents from penetrating as deeply. This was aided by the use of rubber-lined gloves, which completely protected his hands as well. Of course, Sidious's lightning was much more than normal electricity, but at least he wouldn't be put down as quickly, and the rubber gloves would keep his articulation from locking up, allowing him to at least keep wielding his lightsaber if he were being actively electrocuted. Much more powerful jolts of lightning tended to also cause flesh and clothes to catch fire, so to defend against this and other environmental hazards, Darth Vader upgraded his suit with a padded multi-ply body glove that covered everything below his neck. This flexible quilted material was blast dampening and fireproof, which protected against both flames and corrosive gases. These functions actually helped him to survive the multiple blasts of lightning that he took from Starkiller later in the future. However, the reason it did not avail him on the second Death Star was because Luke had sliced off this hand. This compromised the integrity of his suit by exposing the wires that conducted the lightning straight into the breathing apparatus of the Dark Lord, killing him. But speaking of Starkiller, that happened to be the second and the most prominent of Vader's contingency plans. Of course, it was less of an emergency plan and more like a premeditated attempt to overthrow the Emperor, which is rare for Vader, and it nearly succeeded. During the earliest days of the Empire, Vader had not yet accepted his lot as Palpatine's lackey. He still believed that his destiny lay at the very top, and he was ready to plot his revenge, but he knew that facing the Emperor head-on would spell doom. So Vader was actively looking for a way to enable his ambitions. An opportunity was provided to him during the last days of the Jedi Purge, when he hunted the Jedi Knight Kento Merrick to the world of Kashyyyk. There, Vader fought the Jedi to defeat, and felt a much greater presence nearby. At first, Vader mistook it for being Kento's master, but was surprised to find that it was actually his son, who had been born with an extraordinary connection to the Force. Vader would take Galen Merrick and train him in the ways of the dark side. He had Galen live and train in secret within the bowels of the unfinished parts of the Executor Super Star Destroyer. The Executor was a colossal ship that was essentially a flying metropolitan city. It measured 11.8 miles or 19 kilometers in total length from bow to stern. It was pretty easy to hide an apprentice there, especially since it was Vader's personal vessel that Palpatine rarely boarded. And since the Executor was almost always on the move with Vader's own personal missions, it made it very difficult for Sidious to sense or pin down another strong dark side signature. So quite honestly, this was a genius deception. But what was even wiser is how Vader decided to train his new secret apprentice. Fascinated by Galen's latent potential, he did everything in his power to bring out its most destructive capabilities. Vader trained Starkiller to use his power at a constant maximum output. Every day he used torturous methods to push Starkiller's limits, always searching for a realm beyond the boundaries of what should have been possible. Truthfully, Vader was not interested in a real apprentice or a successor. Vader needed a weapon. All of this was for one purpose. Vader had finesse and experience, but lacked the power to take on Sidious directly. And so Starkiller would fill that position of required energy. He would be a blunt force instrument that could match Sidious's raw output, while Vader matched Palpatine's technique. As a team, Vader and Starkiller were two halves of the same whole. The one needed to undermine the Emperor's collective strength. Although this particular plan didn't plan out as he had hoped, Vader did learn something quite valuable from it: the use of apprentices and proxies. The Cold War between the Emperor and his enforcer could not be fought directly, so it dissolved into a game of proxies and spies. For the longest time, it was Vader who had been watched. Palpatine had the royal guards and the Emperor's hands constantly on standby, and for a length of time, Mara Jade was spying on Vader and reporting his dealings directly to the Emperor. But eventually, Vader began to use Palpatine's own tools against him, learning from his master and trying to make his own hands. The search began early on with Saw Qus. This was one of the Emperor's hands that was sent to kill Vader as a test. Qus knew that it was a death mission to go after Vader, but because of his undying loyalty to the Emperor, he did so anyways. As expected, Qus's ambush failed and Vader was ready to kill him. However, the Dark Lord was fascinated by Qus's loyalty, even to his own death, and so he attempted to have the man cloned after he died. Vader intended to use the inherent loyalty of the clones for his own purpose and design, since each one would be a blank slate. Unfortunately, a different Emperor's hand got to them first, and attempted to use them to stage a coup against Palpatine. Despite the other hand inviting Vader to join him in his betrayal, the Dark Lord sided with his master, then slaughtering all of the Qus clones that he had wanted to use for himself. But one of the most prominent hands Vader later attempted to use for his own purposes was Lady Lumaya. Originally, Lumaya was a Force-sensitive Imperial spy placed directly in the rebellion, but after an accident that left her horribly mutilated, Vader had her cybernetically rebuilt, much like himself. He briefly trained her in the ways of a true Sith, and promised her that she would be his finest servant. Lumaya was totally loyal to Vader, seeing him as a sort of father-like mentor. The Dark Lord would then submit her as recommendation for one of Sidious's own Emperor's hands. Impressed by her skill and her ambition, Sidious accepted her, not suspicious about the fact that he had just allowed one of Vader's own proxies into his own circle of the Emperor's hands. Another brilliant stroke by the Dark Lord. Unfortunately, this all occurred just before the Battle of Endor. The two Sith Lords would later perish on the second Death Star before anything could be made of Vader planting Lumaya as a spy. Vader had many other servants, however. One was the Screety woman by the name of Karis. Vader had met her many years earlier as Anakin Skywalker on the planet of Sky during the Clone War. At the time, he promised to return and trained her after she was rejected by the Jedi. He had made good on his promise, but now, returning as a Dark Lord of the Sith. Vader trained her in the ways of the dark side, and even taught her some Sith sorcery. It's clear that he possibly intended to use her in some way against Sidious, teaching her such an intimate secret of the dark side. Again, unfortunately though, she was killed not too long after the Battle of Yavin by one Luke Skywalker, so nothing ever came of this dark acolyte either. All of these were more direct methods of trying to undermine Palpatine, but there was one contingency that Darth Vader lived out nearly every day of his life. The final plan we could find was his malicious compliance and secret sabotage. Interestingly, as many opportunities as Vader got to go against Sidious, he never took them, mostly because they were all open betrayals. But no matter how many coups happened in the Empire, no matter how many traitorous Moffs arose, or assassins attempted to kill Palpatine, Vader would never side with any of them. Obviously, there's that aspect of acceptance and loyalty that we mentioned at the beginning, but also, Vader knew he could never win a war against Sidious directly. So he built up his master's trust by siding with him no matter what, even saving his life on multiple occasions. That way, in the eventual future when Vader's revenge did come, it would come by his own hand, when the Force informed him to do so. By staying close to Sidious, he was able to subtly undermine him in other ways though, usually by ensuring that Palpatine never replaced him. In canon, Vader found out that Sidious was after a particular data crystal hidden deep in the Jedi Temple. He then manipulated Jocasta Nu to return after the Purge to attempt to find said crystal. Vader located the Jedi and took it from her. It was then when he discovered what was on it. The data within contained information on the locations of every Force-sensitive child in the galaxy, and Sidious had sent both Vader and the Grand Inquisitor to retrieve it. Upon learning what it was, Vader crushed the crystal in his hand, destroying it so that it would never fall into his master's possession. Obviously, Sidious would want to raise another apprentice that was perhaps less disappointing than Vader turned out to be, but the Dark Lord would have none of that. Along with this, anytime Vader came across one of Sidious's servants in the field that claimed him as their master, he executed them. This occurred in the case of Bagor Sadet. This was a Verpine Jedi that Palpatine had captured from the Great Purge. Sidious had collected a group of Jedi survivors and had them brought before him within his own chamber. Then, for his own amusement, he returned their lightsabers to them, ordering them to kill one another. The Jedi, of course, decided all to rush the Emperor at once. Sidious ignited his own blade and took nearly all of them out before they could even cross the room. Sadet was one of the 2 Jedi that remained, petrified with fear, in awe of Sidious's power. He was so terrified that in a moment he turned to the dark side and murdered his Jedi partner, swearing fealty to the Emperor. From then on, Sadet served as Palpatine's spy within the Jedi survivor community. Darth Vader was unaware of him until he came across him in the field searching for other Order 66 survivors. Sadet, thinking that the two were working together, revealed that he was a servant of the Emperor and referred to Palpatine as our master. In response, Vader relieved Sadet of his head. This happened similarly in many other situations with the Dark Lord. Point being, Vader suffered absolutely no rivals. All of this was to ensure that Palpatine would never be able to trade up in apprentices. His greatest contingency was to do everything in his power to stay by Palpatine's side. It was his way of saying, "You may have me as your servant, but now you're stuck with me forever, whether you like it or not. You had wanted something else, but you got me instead, and I will punish you for it. And no amount of your treacherous games will ever allow you to be rid of me. I am the ghost that haunts your every walking hour. I was your greatest prize, but now I am your curse. And now we are both prisoners of each other, because if I die, then I am taking you with me." As always, my friends, thank you for joining us in the archives, and may the Force be with you.